drives results? What is it that really drives, you know, value, if you like? Fell in love with that, met this company, and came over 20 years ago, pretty much living in Jakarta initially. And then fast forward 20 years, and now I'm the managing partner of that company. And it's been a great journey. Let's just say that. It's been a great journey. Had its ups and downs, like every great journey. But it's been a great journey. One of the things I'll say to you, so one of the things that we do, so you can kind of place us, is although we are known for our new field coaching methodology and coach training, actually the majority of the time I spend in leadership development, and my longest serving client is actually ABG, the Birla Group, based out of Mumbai. So we've been working there for well over 15 years now, specifically in leadership development, ontological methodology, leadership development, personal development. And that's really, I would say, my speciality. So enough kind of background, enough about me. Right, let's see. I think we'll start this one in a slightly different way. First of all, I should say, I know some of you, we have done a webinar with you before. A colleague of mine, ex-colleague actually, doesn't work with us now, Ivo. You may have been on with him a couple of years ago. If you have, then some of this may be a repeat. I don't know exactly what he did with you, but I'll, if not, then of course fine. But I will do it in my own inimitable fashion, so there'll be some similarities and some differences. As a way to start, I thought we'd start in a slightly different way. You know, I've been on a million webinars, and I'm sure you have. I'm going to ask you to, ideally, if you can, if you're driving, then please don't do this. But if you're not driving and you're sitting at a desk like me, I want you to write down the answers to some questions. Okay, now if you're in a car, you just do it in your head. I want to reiterate that. Please do not do it if you're driving your car right now. But just going to give you a couple of questions that I want you to answer, and then we'll kind of look at these as we go through our hour together. They're very simple questions. First question: what's your definition of coaching? If you had to explain what coaching is, how would you do that? How would you define coaching? I'm not going to give you very long for these questions, by the way, deliberately. Okay, I want you to write it. You don't have to write it on the chat, just write it for yourself. By the way, I'm not going to ask you to this. It's not going to be any public naming and shaming of anybody. I won't be submitting your answers to the ICF or anything like that. But just write it down, because this is for you. I want you to write down and just see what you think. Okay, that's first question. Second question. Who are you? Who are you? And I'd like you to think about, let's say, 5 statements that you would say are true about you. You know, if you were introducing yourself at a dinner party or something like that, or an event, who are you? Who are you? Roughly about 5 things that you would say in your description of you. Okay. And final question, I think. What's your distinction? What's the difference, do you think, between a mood and an emotion? What would you say is your definition? How would you define a mood or an emotion? How would you distinguish one from the other? Okay, I can see some of you are writing on the chat, which is fine, but honestly, I'm not going to look at that right now. This is really for you, but it's fine for you. It's fine for you to write it there as well. It's no problem. Right. Okay. So we're not going to dive into that straight away. Although actually the first one, we'll talk about coaching. We will come up with that first, but then the rest, the other 2, we'll just see how we go as we go through. Okay. So what I suggest is I'll talk for a little while, just about coaching, ontological coaching, introduce a few distinctions. And then after a while, I'll pause and then I'll see if you've got any questions or anything you want to, anything you want to ask me or any feedback, and then we'll move forward together from that place. So, okay, let's do it like this. So, Aishwarya, could you do me a favor? Could you pull up the second slide? So the first slide is just an introduction, just the introduction slide, but the second slide, the introduction, one that says coaching definition. Great, thank you. Then just flick it through into the second one. Okay, so here's a very simple definition of coaching that I use a lot. Okay, and I'll briefly explain what those four pieces mean. The first element for me that's very important in coaching and that often gets overlooked is that it is a relationship. And the reason I stress on that is a lot of coaching books and programs that I've been on over the years, honestly, when I listen to them or read them, it's almost like coaching has become a bit of a science. It's like, okay, well, when your client says this, you do that. You know, this is your active listening techniques. This is your feedback. This is the way to give feedback, and it's almost become like a technique or a process. And one of my checkpoints for me when I'm going into any kind of coaching is actually to remember that I'm dealing with another human being here. And as soon as I say that, it clicks me into the fact that this conversation, it's going to be an art. It's not going to be a science. Human beings, you know, we're emotional beings. And when my way of coaching somebody could be very different to yours. I know you're all coaching practitioners. We could be sitting in front of the same human being, and how you would coach them could be very, very different to how I coach them. And that's part of the joy and the excitement, and honestly, the juice for me in terms of what coaching is and how it's best approached. And I think unfortunately, there's still a lot of people who want to kind of distill the essence out of it and say, okay, well, really, it's got to be this, then this, then this. So equally, I could be sitting in front of 10 people, and I can't just assume that because I'm doing great work with one person, I can take that and apply it to somebody else. It doesn't work like that. So even though it's a very simple statement to say coaching is a relationship, I think it's very critical in terms of a kind of foundation and grounding point. Secondly, it's not just any old relationship, obviously. And if you really want to distill it down to a foundational level, the bottom line is the person in front of you, they've got to want to win at something. Certainly in my kind of coaching, the way I approach it, honestly, for me, my Unilever background, I'm a big sports guy as well. I'm not interested in just having a general conversation and then walking away. For me, that's much closer to mentoring or even teaching, or that's great. I'm not saying they're bad ways of interacting with people, but for me, if I'm coaching, I really want to work with someone, create a relationship, have conversations with them such that they're able to win, however they define that, at what they want to win at, which is the third point, which is this is not about me. This is about what they want to work on. And then to do that in a sustainable fashion. You know, I'm not interested in them just winning one time. I want to work with them in such a way that they're able to stand on their own 2 feet at the end of the coaching engagement, and then they can move forward. And they may need coaching again in the future at some point, but they're not dependent on me. I'm not interested in that. I really want them to be able to go off and fly. Now, I've been talking there for about, 5 minutes or so on my definition of coaching. What I want you to notice, I want you to notice 2 things. The first thing I want you to notice is the content, obviously, of what I've been saying. There are 4 points there, and I elaborated on them a little bit. And that's the easy part. But honestly, more importantly for me, and this is a kind of a little kind of start point about how ontological, not just ontological coaching, but ontological living, if you like, or ontological kind of working works, is I want you to think back and notice your experience as I put that up. You had your answer. I just gave you my point of view, and then I talked through my point of view. I want you to notice, if you can just think back over those last 5 minutes, and I want you to notice what was coming up for you, because that's what I would call not so much the content, that's really the context. And this is what ontological coaching really begins to work with, which is, you see, we could now stop this and we could just have an hour-long debate about my definition versus your definitions, which would all be very interesting, but at the end of the day, not much is going to change. What's powerful in the ontological approach is for you to notice, you know, whenever I'm coaching somebody, there's always a temptation to get dragged into the content. But what's powerful and what really distinguishes ontological coaching more than anything else is this kind of question, which is, so what do you notice? Not so much what do you notice about your definition versus mine, but what do you notice in terms of how you're interacting in this conversation? So for example, you might be sitting there thinking, well, that actually, I like the first point and the second point, but the third point's rubbish. Or, yeah, actually, I agree with that, that's right. Or actually, no, that's wrong. No, he's wrong, that's too simple. Actually, no, I was on a course recently and they told me something very different. This isn't right. Or I read a book and, you know, I know, so those are the kind of things that are powerful to notice when you're in this kind of ontological space. A lot of the ontological space is noticing what comes up for you rather than get sucked into talking about the actual content of the situation. So that's just as a very, very easy, simple way in. I'm not even going to get into discussing what your definition is. It doesn't matter. You see, that's the content. Your definition may be great. I'm sure it is. You're all coaches. I'm sure you've all got great definitions. That's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing for you is to notice how you participated in that question. Okay, so let me just pause there. Just give me a little bit of feedback. Does that make sense? Have I articulated that? Do you kind of get what I'm pointing to? Yes, no, maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Okay, great. Cool, okay, so that's coaching definition, very simple. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Exciting for me too. I can't remember what the next slide is.
Can I ask a question at this juncture?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so let me see if I can turn my video on. All right, so this is Hemant.
Hello, Hemant.
Hi. So my question is, when you said, what are you noticing? So I'm noticing something every moment.
Yep.
So when you said, what are you noticing? What are you getting at?
Okay, so let me make it a bit more specific. So you might think, so what am I noticing in the domain of my thinking? You know, am I, for example, do I notice I'm assessing this from a screen of this is the right definition, this is the wrong definition, that's better than my definition, that's worse than my definition. So it might be something that you notice mentally. It could be something that you're noticing emotionally. It might be, well, this is exciting. This isn't the kind of this isn't what we normally do on a webinar. Or it might be, oh God, we did this last week, oh God. So emotionally is another place that you can look. And of course, physically too, you want to notice, you know, as you're sitting at your desk or your car or wherever you are, what's your body position telling you? What's your, how are you holding your body? Maybe something happened in your breathing pattern when you saw that first 4 definition. That's different, for example. You know, so yeah, so it's a great question. So and it's helpful for me. So yeah, so in terms of the ontological approach in particular, when I say what are you noticing, what are you experiencing, the classic kind of screens for that would be my thought processes. What am I thinking? Which is language, really internal language.
Okay.
What am I emotionally and physically feeling? Okay, makes sense?
Yes, makes sense. Thank you.
Right, no, but thank you. That was a great clarification. Thank you.
Hey, Marcus, I have a question. Shruti here.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So, Marcus, when you say ontological coaching, is it more to do from the perspective of observing the differences which are there between a coachee and a coach, or is it accepting the differences? Is it observing or it is accepting? From what point is this?
Well, it's not so much the difference between the coach and the coachee, or whatever language you like to use, player, you know, but so let's say coach and coachee. It's not so much noticing those differences, but if I was, it's really about having one of the things that I would do as an ontological coach is have the coachee see themselves in the game.
Okay.
As opposed, pretty much what I just did with you in a very, very simple way. I know it wasn't really a coaching conversation. It was a bit of a cheat, really. It was just an easy way in. But for you to go, okay, let me take myself out of the content of assessing Marcus's definition versus mine, and let me just notice what's going on for me. How did I approach that? You know, for example, did it take me back to my school days? Oh, he asked me a question and I've got to compare with the teacher. You see, that's very common for people.
Yeah.
So, and then sure, then later on in the process, if they were in resistance to that, for example, there might be a process of looking at what's in the way of them accepting what they've then noticed. Yeah, that would also be important. But certainly no need to compare in terms of coach and coachee. Okay?
Okay. Yes, yes. Hey, thanks.
Okay, cool, good. Thanks for the interaction, guys. It makes it a lot more juicy when we have a couple of interactions. Okay, I'm going to move through these next couple quite quickly because I think given that you're all coaching, you're probably going to know, but it'll make the ontological distinction a little easier. So, you know, there are other possible interventions. And the reason I like to say that nowadays is there is a danger nowadays that people think coaching is, you know, the panacea. It's going to cure everything. You know, I don't need to do anything else anymore. Coaching will just, you know, be the way, the truth, and the light. And although I love coaching, I'm very passionate about it. There's other possible interventions that can be very useful in different times. You know, so a consultant or a teacher passing on knowledge, a mentor, you know, transferring experience, for example. Can we go to the next slide, please, Ashwari? So this begins to set up the classic ontological model, which is essentially the A here stands for action, the R stands for results. So what most people in life do is they get a result in their life, which is the R. And if they don't like it, they go back to the A, and they either just try and figure it out for themselves, or they get a teacher to give them some knowledge, or a mentor to give them some experience, or in the business sense, a manager just tells them what to do, basically, gives them advice or instruction, and then they go back and that creates the result. If they like that result, they keep doing it. And if they don't like that result, they kind of go back into that same loop. And that's very common. And that can be, for a lot of challenges in the world, that can be perfectly fine. You know, what I would call technical challenges, you know, technical, loosely understood, those kind of things, that can be fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's a whole bigger world out there than that. So if we could go to the next slide. You see the downside of that, and this is where when I do a lot of my work with managers, they get very stuck on this, which is they're just going to tell people what to do. They're going to kind of give people actions to do, or give knowledge, or give experience, and then assume that the person eventually is going to get the right result. The problem with that, and this is one of the key barriers that happens, especially not only with adults, but it's most prevalent in adults, is when you're a young child, the reason you learn so quickly is you're very much like an open vessel, and things are coming and going. You speak up, you know, I mean, a young child, not teenage, I mean, young child, you know, things freely come, freely go. Ideas come in, ideas are expressed out, you know, you talk a lot, you know, everything's coming in. There's not much filter. And then, as typically, not saying this is true for every single body in every single world and every single environment, but typically what happens as an adult, that box begins to close, and you begin to compare. Oh, well, I learned this at school, mummy. You know, I might come home from school and say, oh, mummy or daddy, I learned that from school. So your idea you just told me, actually, my teacher said something different, so that's not right. And what begins to happen is you begin to form a box that now does have a lid on. And as you get older, that lid and those walls can get very thick. And that's one of the things that often gets in the way of adult education. And so everyone loves to give advice. Everyone loves to share their experience. Everyone loves to tell everyone else what to do. But for a lot of the time, it's not very useful. It can work. I'm not saying it never works or it shouldn't work. but it can work, but it often runs into this barrier, which is people really are not open to that. And as a coach, one of the big challenges is to build a relationship and create conversation where you're coming in at a slightly different aspect. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide. And so the first kind of way past that, and this was kind of where coaching really started, you know, in terms of, certainly in business coaching, you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with Timothy Galway and performance coaching, and, you know, the John Whitmore stuff and all that. And that's great. That's where I started. I love that work. I still use that in a lot of my coaching. I'll still use that. But honestly, at that level, what we're still really at this level of A&R, which is, okay, now I'm not telling people what to do. It's not coming from me. I am having them explore, but I'm still really having people explore the classic granddaddy model, the grow model, from how they see it, you know, based on themselves, how they constitute themselves, what options do they see, you know, where do they want to grow based on how they see is possible at the moment, etc. And that, as again, that's fantastic. Not knocking that at all. That can be very powerful. I definitely still use it in a lot of my coaching. And the key thing that was added in here at this level was, now you've really got this idea of what you do by when. This is in your hands, which is one of the big shifts from a kind of manager to a coaching approach, which is the manager just kind of telling people what to do. It really dissolves that. But if I'm working at that kind of responsibility, I'm really having it over with the player or the coachee in terms of, okay, so what do you see as possible? What options are you going to choose? Where are you going to go with that? What are you going to commit to, etc.? So it shifts the responsibility, which is why it's a lot more powerful in lots of ways. Okay, let me do one more. Let me just finish this off, and then I'll pause again, see if there's any anything you want to ask me. I can see a couple of people have written things. So yeah, if we just go to the next piece. Okay, so the ontology, this is where the ontological approach really is distinct, which is what the ontological approach says is, okay, that's all great, but if we really want to create long-term sustainable change, if we really want to have a different level of results being created, we've got to look behind all that. We've got to look at the person. So the O stands for observer, which is really just the player or the coachee. How are they showing up? How are they seeing this, whatever this is, whether it's the world? How are they seeing other people? How are they seeing relationships? How are they seeing work? And as we said earlier, it might be a mental thing, it could be a physical thing, could be an emotional thing. But what is it that they are bringing to this challenge? And the reason now I call it, well, it's not my terms, these adaptive and technical, these aren't my terms, but the reason I would label it here adaptive is, now we've really shifted the game, because these kinds of challenges require you, the player, to be willing to adapt, to grow, not from a position of I was wrong or I was bad to begin with and now I'm going to be better, but just from a position of I can grow, I can develop, I can learn to have more options, I can learn to see things differently, I can learn to hold my body differently, I can learn to have a wider range of emotion, all of which are going to expand the possibilities that I now see as available to me. And as I have more possibilities for choice, that's going to open up a whole different level of results. And that's really the key distinction in ontological coaching versus what you might call is, whether you call it performance coaching or whatever else you might call it. Okay, so I will expand on that a little bit more, but let me just pause there. Any questions? I noticed someone wrote a couple of things down here, but I'm not, any observations or questions? Anything you want to add?
So Anu has mentioned, if you can read the chat, Marcus. This would be more about observing the various data points, not only about what is being said or the context. Yep,
absolutely. Okay, so the data points typically would be what I would call the content. Okay, so data point typically, it depends how you define data points, but typically the data points would be what someone is saying, you know, the content of what they're saying, as a kind of observer of an observer. As an ontological coach, what I'm learning to do is listen to what's behind the words. What's the context? How must they be seeing the world such that they would say that? what must be true about the way they're seeing things, the way that the distinctions they're making, what must be true about their emotional range, given what they're saying, given the content, what must be true about their context. You see, that's what I'm always looking for in an ontological coaching space. The content is always driven by the context. It's the context gives the text meaning. That's really what it means. And so until I can really see that, and then until the coachee can really see their context, they're really a bit of a prisoner of it, because it becomes very invisible. Let me give you a very simple example. Okay. Okay. Again, don't do this if you're driving the car. The person who's driving the car, don't do this. Okay. But for everybody else, just take your arms and then fold your arms. You may have seen this exercise before. It's very simple. Just fold your arms. Okay. Now, I want you to notice the way you've done it. So for me, you probably can't see, but I've got my left arm on top of my right arm. Okay. Now, I want you to notice how it feels when you sit like that. How does it feel? Does it feel secure or insecure? Does it feel familiar or unfamiliar?
Feels comfortable.
Yeah, comfortable, exactly. But you've probably done it a million times before, right? So it's comfortable, it's familiar, familiar, comfortable, exactly, you get it, right? Okay, now, you notice the way that you've done it, okay? I want you to unfold your arms and now fold them the other way around. So for me, this time, I would have my right arm on top of my left arm. Okay. Now, what do you notice now? How does it feel now? Familiar or unfamiliar?
Little unfamiliar, yeah.
Right, you see, you can still do it. It's not like you can't do it, but it's unfamiliar. It's not so comfortable. It's a bit more of a pain in the neck, to be honest. And you kind of, yeah, okay, but it's all a bit, okay. Now, unfold them again, because some of you look very uncomfortable. So just unfold. Okay, yes, conscious effort needed, exactly, choice. Now, that simple example is a very good example of what I'm pointing to with a kind of invisible context that we all have. All of us have it, whether I'm a coach or a coachee, we all have it. You see, that the first way that you folded your arms, you've probably done that a million times. But there must have been a first time. And the first time probably looked like this. You're a little boy, little girl, big eyes, looking up at your mom, looking up at your dad or your brothers, your sisters, friends at school, whatever it was. And they were standing or sitting with folded arms. And you, with your big saucer plate eyes, look up and go, wow, that's what adults do. I want to be an adult, so I'm going to do that. And you copied them. And you just looked at them and you went, oh, okay, they've done it like that. And you did it like that. And then that was it. And then the second time you did it, you'd kind of forgotten about it. And then you saw somebody and you went, oh yeah, I remember. And then you did it. And then after that, the next 998 times you did it, 1,000 times you did it, you never even thought about it. You see, that's an example of something that just becomes like any habit, whether it's a thinking habit, an emotional habit, a physical habit, it just becomes totally invisible. Now, you might say, what the hell's that got to do with coaching and all the kind of important things I'm doing in my life? Well, that would be a good question. But here's the way to think about it. Think about things like leadership, or think about things like authority. You see, you have beliefs about authority, about leadership. Yes, imprints, yes. You see, you've got all that. And it started in the same place when you were a kid. You see, when you were growing up, you watched your mum and dad. You watched how your mum and your dad interacted. Maybe if you had brothers and sisters, you watched how your mum and dad or the school teachers interacted with people. And you see, the thing that people always forget is when you're a kid, you don't have the big supercomputer you've got today. You see, now you can look back on that and go, oh yes, well, I'm sure I was interpreting it in a certain way. And I'm very, I'm a very sensible 21st century man or woman, and I can interpret all that. Yeah, you can. But at the time you didn't. You see, when you're a kid, you're like a sponge. And so let's say you've got a sister, okay? And when you were young and your sister used to speak back to your dad a lot, and maybe she got a slap, or maybe she got sent to her room. You go, actually, I shouldn't speak back. I shouldn't speak up to authority. People in leadership positions, I shouldn't do that. Or maybe someone at school, maybe you had a schoolmate sitting next to you and they were always putting their hand up. And the teacher always picked them and said, oh yeah, this Johnny, he's very smart. You know, look how often John puts his hand up. Look at you guys, you don't do it as often as him. And you begin to form a belief. Oh, actually, it's the right thing. I should constantly kind of be putting my hand up. Now, you see, what happens is over time, those things that happen as a child, they disappear from view just as much as folding your arms. I promise you, 20 minutes ago, if I'd said to you, which way do you fold your arms? Left on top or right on top? You'd have no idea. You see, it's exactly the same with these kind of beliefs about very important things. I've just picked on leadership and authority. It could have been a million things. You see, now that becomes important because 30 years later, you walk into your boss's office and metaphorically, maybe even literally, but metaphorically, you just go in and fold your arms. You see, you do what you've always done. You don't even, it's just not even conscious. Exactly, unconscious behavior, exactly. You see, and it's not, and I want to really emphasize this, it's not wrong. Okay, please don't hear it like I'm saying that would be wrong. There's nothing wrong with what you learned as a child, for example. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's not that it's wrong or right or good or bad, but the key thing is that it's invisible. You see, and for as long as it's invisible, it acts like a kind of force field or a filter operating around you. And if you look at that chart, that O is just got some barrier. It's like having blinkers as a racehorse. You can't see the blinkers, you just see what you see. And that's why somebody else can walk into the same situation and actually have very different blinkers and go, actually, there's loads of other possibilities here. And you go, oh, no, you can't do that. No, you don't do that. You see, and that's the kind of thing that we're really looking to pick up on, begin to help someone identify as a first step. Okay, so I've been talking again quite a lot there. So let me pause. Any, conditioned belief, absolutely. Any questions, anything you want to ask me or add to that? And awareness is a great first step. And it absolutely it's about creating conscious choices. Yes.
Hi, Marcus, this is Saraswati.
Hi.
And my question is, so for all these conditioned beliefs, etc., how does, you spoke about it also looking at from not just emotional, but from a physical perspective as well.
Yeah,
so,
I'm a big believer in that. So one of the things, again, that distinguishes the ontological approach is it's very heavy on you are not your brain. You see, especially in the 21st century, we human beings, of so many human beings, we like to see ourselves as almost like a brain on a stick. And our body is just this kind of unfortunate, irritating thing that has to drag around our brain. But actually, all the research, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with this, so much research nowadays about what's going on in your body is a critical element to how you experience the world, your ability to perform. You may be super smart, you may have degrees coming out of your ears, but actually the way that you hold your body and what's going on inside your body can be a huge factor. Now, there's two general elements to this. One would be a kind of health and wellness angle, which I'm very passionate about. I've done that's one of my passions. I'm trained as a nutritionist. My wife works she's a PCC coach. She works in physical fitness, as well as doing executive coaching, women's leadership. So, we're very passionate about that angle. But there's also the angle of, biologically what's happening in my brain. Your brain is part of your body. Everything about the neuroscientific research that's going on, what's happening in here, the way that I'm breathing has a huge impact. So if I'm standing up in front of a big audience and my breathing pattern goes all over the place, then it completely impacts my ability to think straight, act straight, communicate. And so having people notice what's become invisible for them physically is also a huge piece. Think about it like this, very simply, one very simple example, because I'm very passionate about the body part. It often gets overlooked. If you think about it, a lot of our time in the corporate world in particular, we're very cramped. You know, for me now, I'm sitting at a desk, you know, I'm looking over a laptop, or I'm on my phone, I'm in an airplane seat, I'm in the car. So what happens is, you know, I spend a lot of time, especially for me, I'm quite tall, but I spend a lot of time kind of contracted. Now, what's happening there, if I'm contracted, what's happening is on my back, I'm kind of exposing my back. And what's happening is my adrenal glands, it kind of triggers them to begin to fire. As that happens, as I contract my body, my adrenal glands open up, and it's a signal. It's a very primitive signal that happens in your body, because your body is just, you know, your old ancient system that still exists, that kind of reptile part of your brain. And it says, oh, okay, you see, that contracted state is associated with stress. And your body, this is the key thing to think about with your body, your reptile, the oldest part of your brain, doesn't distinguish between you sitting at a desk or you on your iPhone and a lion walking into the room. You see, what your body knows is, oh, you've got into contraction. And so what's the physical processes are going to fire up, and you're not really in control of those. Those are happening automatically. That's the classic fight, flight, flee, all of that kind of, you know, piece. That's happening much quicker than your logical, rational brain can deal with. And that's why, and I bet you've had this experience, I know I have, you get an email, you're sitting at your desk, the email pisses you off, and so you kind of ram back a really quick answer, and then you hit send, and then after you hit send, oh, I shouldn't have sent that. Why did I do that? Or you're in an argument with your husband or your wife or your children, and they say something and it triggers you, and you boom, and you kind of fire back at them. Why? Because what's happened is it's triggered you. And as you get triggered, and I'm sure you've done some work around this, the amygdala and all of that. I'm not going to go into that tonight, but a lot of it's driven from your physical posture. And you spend a lot of time like this, you are telling your system that you're in a stress position. And this is one of the big things why stress, mitigation, resilience, etc. is so big in corporates today. Because people actually, a lot of it is purely physical, and actually having people experience holding their body differently, breathing differently, watching what they put into their body is also a big thing. If you just fuel yourself with coffee and sugar all day, that's also going to play a part in this. There's lots of ways that you can interact around stress, for example, or resilience, which are nothing to do with your knowledge about stress and resilience. Actually, you can get in at a very much deeper level. Okay, so that's a long answer to your question, but it's one of my things that I'm very passionate about.
So the next time around, I'm possibly getting triggered to respond back. So I think I should pay attention to what my body is telling me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the biggest things, when I did this ontological approach, I'd already been coaching for about 10 years before I did it. And of course, there's lots of great stuff in it. There's a fantastic methodology. But honestly, probably the biggest thing that I personally took out was this whole piece about really learning to work with my breath. And actually, different kinds of breathing. For me, that was huge. Very simple. But actually, that really allowed me a very different aspect, a very different way of interacting with other people. Because although I talk about, in the ontological approach, we talk about body, emotion, and language, of course, they're all very, very intertwined. You see, if I have a habit from the history of actually being a little, because I'm quite tall, and especially now I'm in Asia, I'm taller than the majority of people that I meet, not all, but majority. So what I've noticed is, and I've always had this because I'm about 6'2". Even when I was in the UK, it was true, to be honest. For a lot of people, I was taller. So I do have a habit of being a little hunched. And I noticed that. And you see, if you have an unconscious habit like that, it's quite difficult to feel joy. If you just have a habit of kind of your shoulders are turned over a little bit, you kind of used to looking down a little bit, and you have this kind of contract. It's quite difficult to really experience real excitement, joy, and passion. And that was a big part of my own, and still is, big part of my journey and discovery, is learning how to begin to work with my body to influence my emotional world, my moods, my emotions, but also the way that I'm thinking. So they very much, they interact. Yes.
Thank you.
No, at all. Great question. Love that. Love that someone asked about the body. It usually gets left out. Right. Okay. Right. Let's slide.
Marcus, can I
Sure.
just take a minute to ask another
Please.
question? So, what, if I understand, correct me if it's not that, then in a regular coaching, a coach majorly becomes an observer. But here what you're telling is observer of what's happening in the coach's world. But in an ontological coaching, it is that as a coach, I'm aware of what's happening within me, how I'm perceiving it, and also in the coach's world. Is that what you're telling?
I think I hadn't actually, I wasn't conscious, let me say, that I'd said that, but that's great. I think if you've picked that up, I think for me, that's a kind of an advanced level of coaching, which is, yes, as a coach, of course, whatever kind of coaching we're doing, we're always going to be focused on the other person. But I think as your years of experience in coaching grows, one of the things that you can begin to, this is where, for me, mastery really begins to come in, which is also being able to notice what's going on for you while still maintaining your focus on your coachee. And I think that's not easy to do. I think that's something that, that really comes through practice and experience. And if I think about for myself, I find that easier to do with some kinds of people in some kinds of situations compared to with other kinds of people in other kinds of situations. So it's not a kind of, yes, I can do that versus no, I can't. It comes and goes. And that's something, for me that I'm very much looking to do. And I think certainly as an ontological coach, that's a great aspiration to have, to work towards. Yeah, noticing both, noticing you, because you're not a blank slate. I think this idea of trying to give objective feedback, forget it. You're not going to do that. It's just not possible. By definition, as a human being, you are subjective. So it's not about trying to become an objective observer. You never will. But it is about noticing both. Yes. Okay. Yes, okay, let's kind of move on. So I don't think we need to spend too long on this one. I've really been talking about this. So if you remember the previous slide, which was about trying to force information into a box that was closed, one of the ways that I like to talk about ontological coaching is I'm not going to try and force lots of knowledge or, advise you or tell you what to do. Rather, we're going to look at the shape of your observer. So it's very crudely done on this slide, but so that you can then begin to see the shape of your observer and begin to grow that. But again, to emphasize this, not because your current observer is bad or wrong or anything like that, but it's about growth. As human beings, we're always available for growth. So I'm looking to grow that box, and then there becomes more space inside it, and then there's a lot more possibility. Okay, so I've kind of been talking around that for the last few minutes. I don't want to spend any more time on that. So yes, so in summary, what we're really doing here is we're looking at, yes, responsibility in doing is very important. It's not just about noticing. At some point, if your coachee wants to create a different set of results, they are going to have to do something, and that is up to them. So responsibility in doing is very important. But be also, as an ontological coach, be willing to step back from that and say, okay, but what are they noticing? What limits can you see that you could feed back on, or could you have them explore? And so now we're into, who do I need to be, or who do they need to be in terms of to achieve their results? Now, what could so it might be, I might need to, I've identified that actually being more present with my children, being more available with my subordinates, for example. So yes, there are things to do, but how am I going to be is a very different level of interaction. And that's typically where it's not to say that the ontological coach doesn't focus on actions and responsibility and doing and practices. Of course we do, but we also have this other dimension. So it's both. It's not either or. Okay. Right. What have we got next? Okay. So yeah, we're way over time as I thought we might be. So let me just introduce this. So again, you may have seen this before or something similar. That's at the kind of top line level, which is I'm going to be having people look at their observer. And as we said, in particular, the key distinctions that an ontological coach would introduce is we're going to look at the level of the body, language, and emotion. Okay. And when those three are in harmony, that's where this word coherency, or some people call it authenticity, that's what really has things happen for people. That's where the magic lies. The reason for that is, it's very interesting. You know, people often say, well, you know, I want to know what to say. I've got to have the knowledge. I've got to be able to, you know, tell people the right thing. I've got to be able to say the right thing. And so they get very fixated on language. The issue is that if you're not being coherent in that sense, like these three things are not coming together, people don't really hear the language. So, you know, it's a very good example, a very simple example. If I'm with you tonight and I say, oh, you know, I'm so excited. You know, I'm really excited to be on this teleclass. Yeah, it's kind of weird. You see, I'm saying that I'm excited to be on the teleclass, but that I'm going to guess that's not the message you get. You see, in those kind of situations, when things don't match, it's not the language that people listen to. It's the tone, it's the emotions, it's the body language, it's the way that I'm holding and using my body, and the tone that I'm using, the emotion that you're experiencing. Or if I say, oh, okay, I'm so nervous about tonight. I was, you know, I think it's a real disaster. And I'm not enjoying myself at all. It's like, oh, that's just kind of weird. You see, when it doesn't match, the words actually become very, very unimportant. And what happens is you begin to, again, it goes back to your primitive brain. Your primitive brain is much more cued into watching what's happening physically. Why? Because 2,000 years ago, that was your primary filter about, is this person going to eat me or not? Is this person going to kill me? You see, and we are still those creatures. We still have that same system. And so the language of the body, that's going to confuse you. Not the language, the way that your body is, the tone, the emotions, they're the ones that people often really pay attention to. And if you're interested, you can research, or you may already know about the Moravian myth, where, you know, people talk about, oh, words aren't important at all. You know, it's all about your body and tone and emotion. Well, that's not true. Words are very important, but they really become important when everything matches. When everything matches, when there's coherence and authenticity, then what I say to you, then you really get the words. If I say, look, I'm really passionate about what I'm talking about. I've really enjoyed this webinar. This is one of my hobby horses. I'm passionate about coaching. I love what I do. You know, I've been really thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you tonight. Now the words start to really connect at a very different level, because it's all, I hope, coherent, as opposed to those first two examples I gave you. Okay. Okay, right, let's move on. Okay, let me do this one. I'll do this. I know I'm conscious of time. We're really running out of time. But let me just do this one, because I did set it up with you in terms of who are you? Okay, so let's just look quickly at that question, who are you? It's one of my favorite questions. There's no right or wrong answer to it. But for me, one of the things I've got very curious about and interested in recently myself, in terms of my own journey and development, is this whole notion of identity. And who have you decided you are? Because for me, what I've noticed is, whether it's for me personally or people I'm working with, at some level, that is the critical question. Because, you know, knowledge is very easy to get nowadays, but who have I decided I am and who have I decided I can become? You know, a classic one might be in health and wellness. You know, I'm always going to be overweight. I've been overweight for 40 years. My mum told me I was overweight. She told me her mum was overweight. That's in my family. That's my genes. And so there's no possibility there, just as an example. You see, so who you've decided you are becomes very, very important in this, whatever results you want to create, whatever new results you want to create, noticing who you've decided you are and what's possible for you is really critical. And again, they tend to be just like folding your arms. These kind of things, you're not always, some of the things you'll be conscious of, a lot of the things that you won't be conscious of. This is especially true with this distinction between assertions and assessments. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time on in the workshop is, in the initial workshop, is really distinguishing between these two elements. It's put very simply because of time. An assertion is something that is always to do with something that's true or false. It's either correct or it's incorrect. So if I say this is a pen, that would be an assertion. Okay? It could be true, it could be false. If I say this is a pen, that's also an assertion, but it's false. And if I get a reputation for continually making false assertions, it affects my public identity and you think I'm a liar. You assess me as a liar. So that's what assertions do. They're not very exciting, members of the Speech Act family. These are distinctions in language, but they're very key. When I make an assertion, if I say this is a pen, you don't learn much about me, but you just learn about that this is a pen. You learn about the object. Assessments are very different. Okay, so assessments are never about true or false. But the trick is, and the trap is, in English language in particular, is they sound and look the same, but they're not true or false. So I could say this is a good pen. Now, if I say this is a good pen or a bad pen, that's not an assertion, but it sounds like it. It sounds like the same form of language. The issue with assertions, sorry, the issue with assessments like that is they become very sticky and they become very generative of the future, especially what we might call negative assessments. So if you look quickly at your definition, I said, you know, come up with five things about you. If you had to define, you know, yourself, what you think your identity is, or who are you, have a look at what you wrote. Now, I want you to look at, what do you think you've got? Do you think you've got assertions in there? Or do you think you've got assessments in there? All assessments. Yeah, great comment. Usually it's not always, but generally it's a lot of assessments. So to make, I mean, normally I would do a whole piece on this, but I'll just simplify it for now. If you've got things like, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a daughter, I'm a son, I'm 6'2", you know, those kind of things are classic assertions. I think it's not like it's right or wrong, but they will be true or they'll be false. We could check them. They are verifiable. You know, I'm married, I'm not married. That's fine. They're interesting, but they don't generate a lot. The interesting ones to look at are your assessments about yourself. So a classic assessment, an easy one to look at is, you know, I've mentioned my height a few times. Let's say I'm 6'2". You see, now I'm 6'2" is an assertion. Now, when you hear that I am 6'2", how many of you would say that you would then assess me as tall? Just give me a raise of hand. Give me just, how many of you would say I'm tall? Right. Okay. Yeah. Quite a few of you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now you see. Now here's what's important about that. It's not true and it's not false that I'm tall. It is true or false that I'm 6'2". You could measure me. But you see, as soon as you say Marcus is tall, this is one of the key things. If you say Marcus is tall, that tells me, or it tells the listener everything about you and nothing about Marcus. You see, what that begins to show me and show you is your standards for height. What it tells me is, you know, through your context, through your way of looking at the world, 6'2" is tall. Okay. Now, if I was, I promise you, I used to work in Unilever, and I worked in Rotterdam for a year. When I used to go out on a Friday night drinking with my friends, I was the shortest person in the bar, well, with my friends. You see, if I was doing this webinar in Rotterdam and you were all from Holland, I wouldn't get many hands. 6'2"? Yeah, you're a bit of a midget. You see, and so that's a good example where your assessments tell you about you. They don't tell you about the thing that you're looking at. If you're after this webinar, if you go off to your friends and say, oh, Marcus is really, this guy, he's very tall. Doesn't tell them at all. Exactly, tall is true per your standard, exactly. But what the breakdown is people confuse these two things. It's not like assessments are bad, by the way. I'm not saying assessments are bad or assertions are good or anything like that. The confusion comes when people think they're the same thing and they operate from the same place. They're not. And this can get people into a lot of trouble, because if I begin to think that my assessments are really assertions and my assessments are true or false, then you really get lost and your life really ends up looking like train tracks, because there's nowhere to go with you, really. Okay. Yes. So let me pause there for a moment. I mean, normally I would take a lot longer on that piece, but just because of time, I'll short circuit it. So one of the things to notice in your definition of who you are is to look at what assessments do I have about myself. It might be ones that you've already written down. It might be ones that you privately have, especially if they're what you might call negative assessments, because in particular, negative assessments become very generative of your future. They're very sticky. You see, as human beings, we love to be right. And with negative assessments in particular, they stick because they're often about keeping ourselves safe. You know, and survival is, you know, if we go back to our primitive dimensions, you know, that survival is very, very important. If you tell me you've got toothache and I say, oh, I know a great dentist, you go, okay, thank you. And then my friend say, whoa, hang on, Marcus, that dentist is rubbish. I went to them recently and they left an instrument in my mouth when I left. You're gonna listen to the negative assessment much more than the positive one. That's just, you're kind of hardwired to do that. That's a kind of self-defense mechanism. It's survival. And so when you have these negative assessments about yourself, I'm shy, I'm not good at this, you know, I'll never be any good at that, I'm whatever it is. Those are the ones that, if you notice privately, they tend to be privately held. If I have privately held what you might call negative assessments about myself, and then you begin to hold them like they're assessments, you begin to hold them like they're assertions, that's when you get really stuck. And that's why people come to ontological coaches, in summary, because that's one of the big things that we'll do is we'll have you begin to see your operating context. And the way we do that is we introduce distinctions. And one distinction here in language is, I've done very, honestly, a bit clumsily and very quickly, is between assertions and assessments. The average person, you know, that I work with, when I first start working with them, that's very, very blurry line. And actually being able to make clearly see that distinction allows them to see a very different range of possibilities in the world. So let me pause there, because I'm conscious we must be, yeah, we're done on time. So apologies, I've overrun now, got a bit overexcited. So any thoughts, anything you'd like to say to me, or any questions you want to fire at me? I'm conscious we're on time, but I'm not rushing off. So if there's anything you want to ask me, please do. Very welcome.
Do you want me to stop share, Marcus, or?
Yeah, we don't need any more of the slides. Yeah, I think they're fine. Where can we learn more about this? Well, the simple answer would be come and do our program, obviously. That's clearly what I'm going to tell you. There are some good books around. Let me see. The Theory of Love, I think it's called. I'm a bit weak on these. Theory of Love is very good. Language in the Pursuit of Happiness is a good book. Let me come back to, I'll send something through to Ashwari about that rather than trying to think off the top of my head. Will Joylyn and I will come back to you on that. Nowadays, if you Google ontological learning or ontological coaching, you'll see some, I'm sure you'll see some great references online as well.
Okay.
Anything else? If you want to follow up with me privately afterwards, through email and stuff, very happy to do that. Never a problem. My email is, the easiest email is marcus@theworkspartnership.com. And again, Ashwari has got that. So
Sure.
No problem at all. Don't worry about that. Very happy. So yes, anything, assertionist and yeah, okay. Thank you for the assessment. Sorry, I did that so quick at the end, but that is a great one. That is a very simple distinction. It's one of our base distinctions, but it can be very eye-opening for people. It can. It's very simple.
So somebody wants a 2-hour session, so we will plan it once again, Marcus, in the future to have a little longer session with you. Yeah? Okay. And I'm quite cognizant of the time right now, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank you and everybody for attending the session, and especially the simple exercises that you gave, Marcus, was an eye-opener. It's just a very simple thing like folding the arms. It was a completely eye-opener, how habits are formed and how we really get tuned to that. So thank you so much. And if there's any question, we can take it offline and I will flag it off to you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much, everybody. And I have posted the link for earning your CCUs. And once again, I posted in case if you need it. So please copy and please save this link and you can send me the form there, submit the form and you can have your CCUs. All right. So thank you, everybody, and have a good evening.
Great. Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thanks very much. Cheerio.